If you've ever finished a trip wondering why it felt tougher than expected, gear decisions are often part of it. Small choices can drain comfort and energy faster than you realize. Let's start with the first one, trusting the forecast with my sleep system. One of the worst nights I've spent backpacking happened in the Mojave Desert on a trip with 0% chance of rain. The forecast called for clear skies all weekend, and I was in the desert, so of course it's not gonna rain. I was confident enough that I left my rainfly off my tent while I hiked out to retrieve a water cache since there's no water sources in that area. And while I was gone, a freak storm rolled through faster than I expected, and by the time I got back to my campsite, my quilt inside my tent was soaking wet. Now, luckily, it didn't end up being a dangerous situation, but it was really annoying. It was already dark and temperatures were dipping towards freezing that night. I spent the next couple hours using a microfiber towel to dry the quilt out as much as I could, squeezing out moisture, rotating it, and doing everything I could to give myself a fighting chance at a decent night. Eventually, I was able to dry it out enough to stay comfortable, but that night still sucked. Looking back, it came down to two bad decisions. First, trusting the weather forecast way more than I should have. And second, I left camp with my rainfly off and my insulation exposed. One bad decision led to the other, and together they put my sleep system in a really dangerous position. I learned on that trip that you have to respect the weather in the backcountry and never leave your insulation exposed if you depart camp. That one habit alone would have saved me hours of unnecessary work at the end of a long day. Another decision that made my trips harder than they needed to be was assuming my water filtration was fully handled once I packed a water filter. My filter had worked just fine on previous trips, so I didn't give it much thought going into this one. What I didn't think about was how long the filter had been sitting unused on the shelf at home. And when a filter sits unused, leftover moisture can dry unevenly and mineral buildup can form, both of which can partially block the pores. And when I got to my first water source, my filter was basically clogged. Back flushing didn't help, and the best I could get was a very slow drip. When I finally got to camp, it took hours just to filter a couple liters of water, and I was thirsty and it was hot. Now, I got lucky that I could still filter water at all, because my other mistake was I didn't bring a backup method, and if that filter had failed completely, the trip would have ended right there. The lesson was straightforward. Always test your water filter before a trip. If you do find that it's clogged, usually just running some water through it a day or two beforehand will clear it up. And always carry a backup purification method or have a plan if your primary method fails. Something like aqua tabs are a cheap and light option, and that's what I carry now. Water affects every part of a trip, so it's worth making sure that your system is solid before you ever leave the trailhead. Another gear decision that made my early trips harder than they needed to be was how I packed food. I wasn't really thinking about how that food would actually fuel me once I was hiking all day. Now, how much food to pack is a whole separate conversation, and that's not what this is about. This was about packing the wrong type of food and how that choice ended up making every mile harder. On some of my first trips, I packed food that sounded solid and fun to eat, but didn't really support long days on trail. Things like canned soup, apples, oranges, and other water-heavy foods felt sensible and kind of clever, but once I was hiking, they just weren't doing much for me. Those foods weigh a lot and they don't deliver many calories in return. So I was carrying extra weight without getting much usable energy back. And I'd also bring tons of quick, simple, or sugary carbs, tortillas, Pop-Tarts, chocolate bars, gummy bears, and that kind of food absolutely has its place on backpacking trips, but that was all my food. I'd get short bumps of energy, then crash, and start reaching for more stacks about an hour later. What was missing from my food system was balance and better calorie density. Now I make sure at least some of my food is built for sustained energy and not just quick hits. Things like whole grain muffins, bars, and higher quality dehydrated meals. Once I fixed that, my energy stopped falling apart later in the day, and the miles just felt steadier instead of slowly turning into a grind. For a long time, I would adjust my pack straps one time in the morning and then just basically leave them alone for the rest of the day. And sure, the pack felt good at the trailhead, but as the hours went on, pressure and soreness would slowly build, and I just kind of assumed that was part of backpacking. You know, shoulder pain was inevitable. But what I didn't understand yet was that a pack is meant to be continuously adjusted throughout the day as conditions change. In general, you want most of the weight sitting on your hips, with your shoulders and chest carrying just enough to keep the pack stable but not bearing the load. And as the day went on, my pack would slowly adjust, kind of settle, padding would compress, and slowly more of the weight would start to end up on my shoulders. And when that starts happening, a quick reset makes a big difference. When I notice too much weight pressing on my shoulders, I'll lift the pack up slightly, tighten the hip belt a little bit, and let that weight settle back onto my hips, and then loosen the shoulder straps a little bit. And that alone will often take most of the pressure off of my shoulders and give me some relief when I'm starting to feel that pain. And from there, additional small adjustments can help depending on the terrain. Tightening the load lifters on climbs pulls the pack in closer, loosening them on descents reduce shoulder pressure, and if my chest started feeling tight, easing off the sternum strap usually fixed it right away. And once I started making those adjustments throughout the day, depending on how the pack was feeling with my body, discomfort stopped building into the background and the pack just rode better overall. Another decision that quietly made my trips less enjoyable was cutting small comfort items just to save a few ounces. Now, this kind of stuff is all subjective depending on your own personal hiking style, but for me, things like a pillow, warm camp socks, a simple sit pad, or an extra pack of hot chocolate are things I usually end up regretting leaving at home just so I could shave a few ounces. Those things felt easy to leave behind when I was weighing my pack weight. However, during the day, I realized a few extra ounces wouldn't really have mattered. Usually when I get out there, my pack feels fine and it's like a few extra ounces probably wouldn't have made a difference. My hiking probably would still feel normal. And by evening, it would catch up with me. Now I'm really missing that camp chair or those warm socks or that extra cup of hot cocoa as the temps dropped. Those are items that don't matter much while you're hiking, but they matter a lot once you get to camp. That's when your body is trying to relax, warm up, and recover. And without a few basic comforts, I just didn't enjoy camp as much, even though I hadn't really gained anything by leaving those items behind. Now, some hikers are happy trading optional comfort items for a lighter base weight, and that works for them. But for me, I was cutting items that I liked having at camp without really getting the benefit of a noticeable lighter pack. And once I stopped cutting the things that made camp feel livable for me, my evenings got better, mornings felt smoother, and my trips felt more enjoyable instead of something to push through. And looking back, that's really what all of these came down to. Small decisions that didn't seem like a big deal at the time, but they made good trips harder than they needed to be. And if you want to avoid some of these mistakes on your own trips, check out this next video. It walks through comfort upgrades that actually earn their place in your pack. And if these kind of breakdowns help you dial in your setup and enjoy your time out there, consider subscribing. I share practical lessons like this on the regular. All right, take care out there, and I'll see you on the trail.